again, once more, that questions cannot come from the public because they were not submitted beforehand. However, the councillors in the room have their finger on the pulse in relation to the things that have been happening regarding the LTNs, and we have had a lot of discontent that has been fed to us through our surgeries. So you're going to have to trust us as the elected officials to be able to ask those questions to the officers and the cabinet member. So I'm asking you respectfully to allow the process to happen. And if there is anything that is left wanting or anything, questions that you have outstanding, then you contact your local councillors. You actually use the online systems that are there. There is a 6 months public objection, first 6 months of public objection for the LTNs. And this is an experiment in relation to the LTNs, and it's all in the information that the officer gave in the beginning. So it's not like you are voiceless, and it's definitely not that your voices won't be central to the rolling out of the LTN. So please, I beseech you, allow the meeting to take place. Okay? So I'll pick up where I left off. I think it was Councillor Hymas, and was it Councillor Ali who had asked the question? Was it Ali?
A new question.
Yes. Okay, Councillor Ali, can you please submit your next question?
Thank you, Chair. So I have a few questions to the officers. I want to try and take them in, if you can group them together to save time. So one of the things you mentioned in your presentation was to do with the key metrics in terms of how we monitor the key objectives of the LTN in terms of reducing pollution, reducing emissions, congestion, bus waiting times, etc. If there's a scenario where in a particular LTN that those objectives are not being met, will you pull the LTN? So for example, a practical example, there's a new LTN coming in where in my part of the ward, which has a significant A road and a significant B road. And there are concerns about waiting times because the issue we have is a lot of the traffic lights are run by TfL on the red routes. So there's a scenario where people are not able to use the old rat runs anymore, and they're going back onto the A roads and the B roads. So there's an impact on the bus waiting times and emissions and pollution. Will we pull the LTN in those particular areas based on the LTN objectives you're trying to meet? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ali. Just to quickly say, because you did direct it at officers, but I think that's actually a political question. Right, not really. Yeah, I know it won't be an officer decision.
My apologies, Councillor Carter.
But what I would say is that obviously, you know, the reason that we've brought forward this or initiated this programme is because we've looked at schemes across the capital, and we've looked at the evidence base from those schemes and looked at whether or not they achieve the aims that they set out to do, and to ensure that our responses, we definitely want to listen to residents in the local area. We'll be opening up that feedback after the 6 month objection period, which is a statutory period, but obviously even that feedback will be important for the future of the scheme. We will be, for the rest of the scheme, listening to that lived experience. But what is crucial, because perceptions can sometimes not be cannot necessarily accurately define. So when you're sitting in traffic, for instance, it can seem like 20 minutes when actually we've put in monitoring equipment, very high tech data collection equipment, so that we will be able to monitor the level, the journey times, the amount of traffic on roads at certain times, etc., as well as air quality monitors. Now, across the scheme as a whole, we will want to see an overall reduction in traffic. We will want to see the scheme deliver on all of its metrics, but we are going to be aware that in some schemes, and some schemes do pretty much deliver on all of them, but some schemes, there are patchy, the results are mixed, right? And at that point, I would say that the right approach is to deal with those where there are mixed results, deal with them, tweak the scheme in order to improve it and optimize it, right? If it isn't delivering, in other words, air quality is going down, congestion is going up, We're seeing the numbers of cars actually increase. We're seeing active travel choices, scootering, walking, cycling, all of those actually not increase. Then the scheme isn't working. I mean, it is as simple as that, and that's going to be a tough, a tough pill to swallow. But absolutely, if it's not working, we can't go ahead with it. But
and you'll pull the scheme.
And we would pull the scheme. And we would pull the scheme. We would have to.
Can I follow up very quickly, Chair and Commission? Sorry, I'll be very brief.
Yes.
In terms of the process, now, if you look at page 12 of the report, there's a map of the London Borough of Haringey, and it has different parts of the borough in purple with an LTN and a number, a figure. So, for example, Bounds Green, LTN 1. St Anne's LTN 2, Brewster West Green LTN 3. Now, my question is, what was the process in determining which LTN areas needed to be phased in first? And I asked this, for example, if you look at White Hart Lane, or my ward, Bruce Castle, it's LTN 18, Northumberland Park LTN 17. We know that that part of the borough has far few cars, but far more congested, you could argue. Why was it determined that a particular part of the borough would go first when, for example, the issue is not as pronounced as, for example, my part of the ward, or the far east of the ward, Northumberland Park, Tottenham Hale, Bruce Castle, White Hart Lane? Is there some sort of reason how they came about that formula? Because I'm very interested to understand how that order has been done.
I'll defer to officers in a sec, because the decisions relating to these particular schemes were made before my time in post as cabinet member. So I wasn't party to the decision-making process at that point. But what I would say is there are a number of elements that have to come into play, and one of them has to be, the impacts of traffic on the local population, car ownership numbers. So, like you say, especially as you go east of the borough, car ownership numbers go down much further, although we're seeing quite serious impacts from motor traffic on those residents. And just, to underline that point, we're seeing it's about the health impacts as well. So the metric there would be, the high numbers of people that are impacted with respiratory diseases, coronary diseases, cardiovascular diseases, mental health issues related to potentially the lack of active travel, the lack of exercise, etc. Right. So looking at all of those metrics, the health metrics, the traffic metrics, and the car ownership metrics, and using that as well as collision data and all these other things. So there are a number of things that feed into it. I don't know if you want to have any comment on why these schemes specifically were chosen at that time.
Sorry, and just before you come in, and also why more deprived wards and wards that have a far lower car ownership are far down the list. To me, it makes no sense, but I'm sure there's a logical answer. Thank you.
Can you just briefly answer that, if you've got anything to say, because I'm trying to move on and with time is fast spent.
Unfortunately, they predate my time at the council too. I understand that those bids were made in a very narrow bidding window for money. Therefore, there may not have been full reasoning behind the initial three. What I can advise is that the Walking Cycling Action Plan now adopted contains a set of prioritisation criteria for future LTNs. So we haven't decided upon a full programme of future LTNs. That's to be decided in conversation with residents and with members and other stakeholders. And the sorts of things that you've mentioned around deprivation, car ownership in Tottenham, these are exactly the sorts of things that we will be taking into account when we decide how to prioritise LTNs in future, having regard to the fact there will need to be prioritisation because funding will always be finite.
Thank you very much. I have a question coming from Councillor Hymas and then Councillor Corwell. Oh, sorry.
No, mine questions for item 8, so I'll wait until everybody else has finished on item 7.
Okay, thank you very much. So, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to feed back a little bit about the resident engagement I've had in St Anne's. I mean, firstly, I wanted to say that the way in which the exemption was communicated was quite confusing. On the consultation letter sent out, it said permit holder X2. Now this, for many people, they thought it referred to 2 cars, like ×2, and for others, they thought it referred to their parking permit, which meant that that then delayed the process of people applying for badges, and also meant people were coming to me the day before saying, am I exempt because I've got a parking permit? And I think going forward that needs to be thought about. I also know that in St Anne's, unfortunately, compliance hasn't increased at the same rate as in Bounds Green, as I understand. A lot has been made of the kind of signage in particular. There are quite a lot of signs, but they're relatively unclear. And I know that additional signage has now been put in place before the schools go back. But could you maybe say something about the strategy for making sure that not only in West Green and Bruce Grove is that confusion kind of eliminated as quickly as possible, but also that we're constantly reviewing how we demarcate to drivers, particularly in those first few weeks where we have to be honest that there will be a lot of adjustment and there will be confusion, and that can make drivers do more dangerous manoeuvres as they suddenly get to the barrier and see that they have to turn around. And the last point I wanted to just raise very quickly was about making sure that councillors also have a view of the letters and of the information before it was sent out. It was really helpful if, I think those key stakeholders, particularly schools and others who I know were consulted, and I know that in St Anne's a majority of people did support the implementation of an LTN when that consultation was done. But I think that at every step of that process, it's important that councillors and other sort of community leaders are brought in. That's more of a comment than a question, but thank you.
Who will be answering that question, please?
For the interest of brevity, Chair, because I know obviously we don't want us doubling up. Maybe if I answer a bit of it and then defer to you, if that's okay. I'll just say very briefly, the permits. Yeah, I mean, this is ultimately it's. Some of the permits in other areas that make more sense. I know the St Anne's one, the X2 actually, with the hindsight, can be confusing. We understand that. It's very difficult. Obviously, it's a specific permit for this scheme. So how can we highlight that better in the future? Signs, again, we put in more signs than other boroughs. They weren't enough. Fair enough. These are all lessons learned. We need to improve, and we've acted on that as quickly as possible. And with councillors' letters, councillors should have received all the letters in advance of residents. I don't know if you want to add anything.
So the other bit of clarification I've had through from Simi is in relation to the booklet that's going out for Bruce Grove West Green. We'll give you some real clarification about what we're using in terms of the description of those LTNs, particularly in relation to that issue about X2 and everything else. In relation to the signs, as Councillor Carter said, we've actually put out an awful lot more signage than anywhere else, we believe, and supplemented that this week and over the weekend with additional signs to make it absolutely clear what's going on.
Hold fire a minute, Joy. Councillor Carwell, you said you had a question, and then Councillor here, and then Joy. Thank you.
Firstly, obviously this whole issue had to go to some sort of planning. So my question is, how did the council come to this conclusion of how to organize this whole thing? Did you learn from another country, or was it just from this country?
So LTNs have been rolled out pretty much across the whole of London. Haringey has been behind everywhere else. So what we've actually done is learned from the other experience from those other boroughs. It's certainly in terms of the approach we've taken. A lot of the LTNs have been rolled out across London during the pandemic, using the Emergency Active Travel Fund from the government, and done it with virtually no consultation. So as was explained in the presentation, we've gone through an extensive consultation engagement process before we've actually got to a point of actually putting a thing out. And the other thing I would actually clarify in relation to the communication that went out in the booklets were all shared in advance with all ward councillors to make sure that ward councillors did actually have some information prior to the two LTNs going live. The same thing will apply when we come to Bruce Grove West Green as well.
Thank you very much. And then Councillor Emery, please.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate it. So my questions are going to be on Section 8, unless anybody has any more questions on Section 7 they want to run through first. Is that okay? Super. Okay. So I and many other residents are big fans of the cycle hire bikes that have been in London for some time now, such as the ones offered by Lime. A few months ago, the boundaries on the app for these bikes crept into Haringey. I was quite happy to see this and saw it as a bit of a quick win for active travel in Haringey. This item, this update, item 8, also contains a line about launching a dockless bike hire scheme. With that in mind, I saw recently the Haringey Council Twitter account announced that all Lime bikes are to be removed. Just wanted to try and pick up on that one. Do you want to start off that one?
Yeah, absolutely. We're committed to a borough-wide e-bike scheme. I think that's an important supplement to the walking and cycling. It's not a supplement, it's a core element to make sure we increase access. However, there are issues, for instance, with Lime bikes being left all over pavements. They're a hazard, especially to partially sighted people or people with prams, etc. So, there are a number of reasons why actually you can't just open up, and boroughs have a memorandum of understanding. You don't with the organisations, the companies that do it. You don't just have mission creep. Right, there are reasons for that. There are lots of things that need to be worked out, where they're going to be docked, safety issues, pricing, etc. And also some of them, I believe, have even like geofencing, speed limiting, and all these kind of things. And we need, and our officers are undertaking that process. But in the meantime, we can't just sort of say, well, here you go, operate here, without any of that memorandum of understanding. We have a duty of care to our residents. I don't know if you want to add anything to the dockless thing. I don't know if there's, I think that pretty much is it.
Any more questions, Councillor Emery?
You mentioned about the bike hanger update, and it mentions how it's been increased priority on the hanger. Can I just get an update on that? And also, so there's a section in here. I'll find the section. It is page. No, I can't find it. Apologies. It was basically around the idea that the bike hangers, obviously that need to be improved, have been put under increased priority. I just want to try and get an understanding of what that meant in terms of facts and figures. The other one was to do with the Tfl funding. Obviously, with Tfl now struggling, kind of puts the thing into practice a bit difficulty. And I know you've mentioned this plan about a walking and cycling action plan delivery plan. So that obviously isn't part of this. So I just want to get a bit more understanding of what that meant. So is that something that means that we're going to be pushing all these things a bit further into the future?
Yeah, thank you. Well, so obviously, again, that's a key, but secure bike storage is an important one, considering especially a lot of people, the majority of people in this borough live in flats. And obviously on the estates, you're not allowed to keep your bikes in the public areas, so for safety reasons. So it's absolutely imperative, if we are going to see more people cycling, which we want to see because of the massive health benefits, obviously to the general population, we need to be able to ensure that they can park their bikes safely. Now, before last year, we were completely dependent on TfL funding so we put in bids for secure storage. Last year, along with the Walking and Cycling Action Plan, we changed that to a dedicated budget of £200,000 a year in order to satisfy the growing demand, and we expect that demand to increase. So we've prioritised it. We're now looking at, again, how we can increase the number, because we are finding that the numbers of people waiting for a secure space is growing. And obviously, with these new schemes going in, we expect that, as has happened in other boroughs, for that to grow exponentially. So we are looking again at how we can increase that. But we've gone from bidding to a dedicated budget plus bidding, and we'll see how we can improve it.
And on that specific point, how many numbers do you think you'll get out of that 200,000? How many bike hanger spaces would you get out of that £200,000 fixed budget? You get, I mean, it's give or take a few, but we're talking probably about 38 hangers per 200k, and there are 6 spaces in each hanger, and I can't do the maths off the top of my head.
Councillor Wallace, can I just ask can I just ask one question as the chair? The cycling for the fund, for what funding period does the 5.1 million approved in 2021 to deliver on the WACP cover? For what funding period? Yeah, there's a 5.1 million approved in 2021 to deliver on the.
In a sense, there was no window. So it came from community infrastructure levy, which is money that we charge to developers per square metre, which is they have to pay that in order to basically, in a sense, add value to any development that they do in the borough to local residents on infrastructure. So correct me if I'm wrong, but ultimately we could have that money allocated and then go, actually, it's going to take us 10 years to spend it. But as it has happened, we are doing so much, our ambition is so great that that money is going incredibly quickly. I don't know if there's a time frame that you...
Yeah, sorry, I'm going to bring in Councillor.
So I just clarify that the £5.1 million is allocated for 3 years. That's 21-22, 22-23 and 23-24. So that's, and it can be apportioned in however we wish over that 3-year period. The other thing to clarify in response to Councillor Emery in relation to TfL is that in the last week we've actually had clarification that the TfL and Department for Transport have actually got a settled figure. We're now going to wait for the next couple of weeks when we hopefully get clarification. Hopefully get some clarification on what that means in terms of the allocation to Haringey and how much of the funding that we've got we will receive.
Councillor Emery.
Can I just come back on that point there? So following that, we will then get the WCAP delivery plan based off that, then when we know more from TfL.
It will help inform that in terms of what we decide to move forward with through consultation with Councillor Hogarth and others.
Is there any more questions from the councillors, please? I've seen Councillor Hymas first, Councillor Wallace, Councillor Colry, and Councillor Ali. Colry.
Right, what I want to say is it's back to the previous item, but just one thing, the signs, they're too small. Point in case, the one that's on the corner here by the Cypriot Centre, until you're on top of it, you don't see it, it's behind the trees. So somebody will go down there accidentally. So that's what I noticed when those no school timed street things went in. As regards to the cycle hub things, what criteria are you using for the areas that get them, want them, and the people that want and need them that haven't even got them yet, mainly Muswell Hill?
Yeah, absolutely agree on the signage. Again, learning experiences, you know, as Mark said, you know, we've gone further than any other borough, as far as I know, but we could have gone further and we could have, yes, and, you know, I mean, and we've seen that live. A lot of things, you can see them on paper. When you see them live, it's a slightly different situation. In terms of bike hangers, there are a number of metrics that they use and criteria they use to prioritise the allocation of bike hangers, but essentially it is down demand-led. So where there are more requests for bike hangers will generally be prioritised. So if one street is requesting 20 and another street is requesting 15, then the street with 20 is likely to be prioritised. It also has to do with, you know, how long that they've been waiting and all of those kind of things. So there's quite a complex mix. But again, the reality, at the end of your question, which you kind of said, is there's a lot of people without them. And we know that's why we've had to really look at, actually, even though we've improved it massively over the last 12 months, we've got to improve it even more so that we can meet that demand as quickly as possible.
Muswell Hill have been waiting 2 years.
Thank you very much, Mike. Councillor Hakatos, sorry, apologies. So then it's Councillor Hymas.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the walking and cycling action plan, I just wanted to ask a little bit about equalities, because obviously it would be interesting to know if there'd been any assessment, particularly on cycling rates and looking at the difference between gender and race, especially, and whether the plan will include steps to give more opportunities and also to make it easier and more accessible for particularly people on low incomes to use bicycles. And linked to that, of course, is the massive impact and the disproportionate impact that the proposed bus cuts are going to have on our ethnic minority communities and also on our low income communities. So I'm wondering, given the impact that will have on walking and making walking more difficult, again, has Haringey thought about ways in which those impacts can be mitigated through this plan?
Yeah, really good questions. I think inclusion is one of the key elements to this. So absolutely, there are large portions of our Haringey residents who feel that they are excluded from cycling due to safety. So women, especially parents, children, and remembering that cycling, there's endless evidence about the health benefits of cycling, and obviously getting that 20 minutes a day of exercise, especially, can be transformative for health. So we want to get those people that are most vulnerable, those people that are excluded. Like you say, it's often residents from African and Caribbean heritage, that suffer from some of the worst inequalities in this borough, especially health inequalities, and they are also ones that are excluded from cycling, but also that does include the elderly, women, etc. So it's core to this is by making cycling safe, we increase its numbers. By increasing its numbers, we increase the health for those most impacted negatively. And again, people on low income. So people on low incomes is something that we're really focused on, is how can we get an accessible bike scheme going that will mean that people who cannot afford a bike will get a bike. And we're absolutely determined to make this a sort of a major program in the next couple of years, 2 or 3 years, so that we can really expand the access to bikes. And with the bus cuts, the only thing I would say finally, which is that I think, Mark mentioned that there was a settlement with TfL. Now, I believe that settlement, although it doesn't put us in the complete safety zone, I think there is a chance that there might be less cuts that were proposed. We have responded to TfL robustly, saying that we will not accept bus cuts in our borough. It's counter to our aims of supporting people on low incomes, but also obviously increasing sustainable modes of travel. And obviously that is down to central government pulling that funding from TfL. Mark?
If I could just add a bit about bike hangers, there's a section on the council's website about bike hangers and where we're consulting on, and that includes Muswell Hill. I'm actually looking at a location plan for consultation on Queen's Avenue. So we are progressing across the borough, and it is actually based upon demand, but that information is actually on the website, Councillor.
I'm going to give somebody else at the moment, Joy, opportunity to ask question, because Councillor Carlroth has been putting his hand up for some time, so please go ahead. And then Councillor Peacock.
Okay, they say the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Can I suggest to all our fellow councillors here that we take a day out or an afternoon out and we all get on our bikes or hire bikes and take a ride around the boroughs and see exactly what the problems are?
Councillor Peacock, please answer your.
Mine is slightly different. I'm a little bit hostile to some of the people who ride bikes, particularly the ones who ride on the pavement. And yesterday I was at the bus stop in Willoughby Park Road, and I nearly got knocked over by 2 boys who aggressively were riding their bike on the very narrow pavement, and they shouted at us to get out the way, when in point of fact they should have been more considerate. What are you going to doing anything to these youth? It's generally youth who ride their bike or their electric scooter on the pavement to the danger of older people like me. You know, I can't always jump out the way quickly. So I've been very interested to know what you actually can do to stop it. And the other thing is, just reverting back to the LTNs, is there legislation that says that we have to do it?
Okay, so so with the pavement riders, I mean, a lot of the time, obviously, the reason why, I'm not saying that that's always the case, but the reason why a lot of people will go onto the pavement is because of the perceived danger or real danger on the road. So now, I think there's some laughter based on a video that's taken of me on a shared space pavement, which exists. I actually don't think they're ideal, but there is one just by St Anne's on Backboy Lane where there's signs on the pavement that show a cyclist and a pedestrian. So we have a number of those in the borough. I actually think, like you say, I think and best practice is to have completely separate lanes for both pedestrians and cyclists and keep them physically apart. I think that is best, especially for when you've got young people, shall we say, who might drive a little bit more recklessly or ride a little bit more recklessly. And is there a law that says you have to put these in? There isn't a law that demands that you put these schemes in, but it is a priority. And obviously it's been changed in the highway code as well to recognise this priority, that on the priority of roads, pedestrians come first, then cyclists. And that's been an important step change in the way that we think about this, and funding obviously has come to help support that. Not enough, but it's there.
Can I just come
Thank
back
you
to
very
on
much,
the fact
Councillor.
that a lot of these bikes do not have a bell, so they can't indicate that they're coming along. They do not have a light. And I said to this young boy that nearly knocked me down, you know, your bike is not fit for purpose because it hasn't got a bell, which would have notified me that you were coming along, because my back was obviously looking to see where the bus was coming. I wasn't looking here to see what I was going to be knocked over. The other thing that really winds me up as well is the fact that all this for bikes, I pay my car, I pay tax, but nobody ever pays any tax for a bicycle. And I think that all people with bicycles should have an MOT to make sure that they are fit for purpose, and perhaps even get charged, say £10 a year, to have a bicycle licence to make sure that the bicycles are fit for purpose and the people that are riding them are considerate of other people. Because at the moment, quite a lot of them, as I said, are not considerate at all.
Can I just interject there to say that's more of a statement than a question? And thank you very much for that, Councillor Peacock. I'm taking 2 more questions from the floor because we have to move on and time is fast spent. And equally, I had to adjourn it. So I'll have one last question from Councillor Wallace and Councillor Ali.
It's just to come back to you, sir. I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Bryce. Yeah. The bike lane at Queen's Avenue doesn't supply the people that live down behind Marks and Spencer's car parks. That whole street there, the 3 streets that go down there, Jackson's Lane, straw poll again, talking to people.
Do you mean St James's Lane?
Yeah. Yes, at James's Lane, yeah. They want them there. It's no good for them to have it in Queen's Park when they live down ill.
As was said earlier on by Councillor Carter, what we do is respond to the requests that come in. So we've actually responded to a request in that particular instance for Queen's Avenue, Muswell Hill. So it is very much a case of driven by public demand. So I would encourage you to encourage your residents to actually make their views known. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Can I then go to Councillor Ali for his last question? And then following that, I'll be moving on to the update on parking management system, which will be done by Mark Stevens quickly. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Very final 2 questions. One on the walking cycle action plan. Most residents, if you take yourself back to the pandemic, the one thing that people really enjoy is going out for a walk and discovering the most beautiful parts of the borough. Where I live, it's Tottenham Cemetery, it's Bruce Castle Park, it's the Lee Valley. Now, one of the things that I would like to see from the strategy is actually how do we encourage people to walk to these locations, and thinking about that journey that person goes through. So thinking about the pavements. I know we have a pavement scheme already, which Highways is leading on, multi-million pound annually. But one thing that really sort of bugs me as a councillor, walking up down the streets or cycling or driving, if it's a sin, but I do drive, but I cycle too and I walk, is that there's the pavements that go along these beauty sites are not fit for purpose. And I think it's about how do we find a way to identify targeted programming of, priorities in those kind of areas. So, especially places that are really heavily trodden on. And the other thing about walking in particular is about how do we encourage people to walk in general. I know we have Haringey walks, and it's long established, it's long running, but how do we encourage more women to walk, more ethnic minorities to walk? I know there's a lovely Afro-Caribbean group in my ward which does regular walks of over 80s in particular, and they really love using Bruce Castle Park and the cemetery. But how do we actually create and encourage more communities and more demographics that wouldn't actually think to walk, but think, there are great routes in the borough that we can explore. And finally, the access, especially access to these green sites in particular, make sure that it's pavement widening, more trees, so it's more inviting. And finally, very tiny quick question on school streets. Is there any evidence to show that if a school is against a school street, anecdotally, like a head teacher says, I'm not very keen on the school street malarkey, what's the approach that officers take or cabinet members take to actually encourage them to say, it's actually a really good scheme and this is the benefit seen in other schools and we can address your concerns? Because I'm hearing some really concerning evidence that there are certain school residents who want a school street, but they're not happening because the head teacher has overruled them. And that's quite concerning to hear. So, we are resident led. So it'd be good to hear what we're doing to tackle that sort of, conscious bias.
Councillor Ali, that was 6 questions in one. So you're going to have a marathon to just address it, please. If you can touch on it, yeah. Thank you, that's okay.
Succinct and concise. So with the school streets, absolutely there can be schools that have concerns, and we have an incredibly good and active travel team that work with the schools on all kinds of things like the STARS initiative and, getting kids scootering and riding, and there's some really exciting stuff they do with schools, and they're very well regarded by the schools. And our head of carbon as well is very proactive in terms of which the carbon team have been running the school streets team, running the school streets program, getting involved and just talking with them. I've gone to schools as well. Sometimes, they don't realise the demand often. So they think, actually, look, our parents don't want it. So sometimes it's about reaching out to the parents and saying, you just need to communicate that with the school. But there is a communication. We don't go in loggerheads with them or anything like that. It's just a communication and conversation. And most schools, pretty much all of the schools, we have a very good relationship with, and it's been really productive. And we've got many, many more school streets to go in. So there's that. In terms of walking, you're absolutely right. I'll pass to Mark in terms of where we prioritise pavements at the moment, but absolutely it's a walking and cycling action plan. Walking comes first. We need to look at all of those things. So wayfinding between all of these great places in this amazing borough. We've got so much heritage, we've got so much wildlife and parks and all of these kind of things, and town centres, how we can create that, and making, obviously, part of the whole LTN programme is about public realm improvements as well. So at the moment, they're temporary schemes, experimental schemes. So we can't make those public realm improvements right now, but we're still going to do it regardless. So things like more trees. There's trees on this agenda. Making roads tree lined is a massive difference to the ability for people to walk down them, right? The shade in the summer, which we want to do, and looking at lighting and the way that we can, and we're transforming lighting in the borough. We've invested millions that we will start seeing in the new LED system. Some of them are already in, but really looking at being creative. Sorry, I'm not being succinct enough, am I? Right, okay, but that's it. And I don't know if you want to just say on how we prioritise pavements at the moment.
Councillor Colwell, can we just park that for a second, and can Mark?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So in terms of the prioritisation process, we look at condition, we look at the number of complaints that we receive, we actually consider councillor requests for intervention as well. So if you look at the Highways and Street Lighting Investment Plan report from the 7th of March, in the appendices it gives details of all the schemes we're actually delivering for this year, which ones have actually been identified by councillors as well. So we do take a very holistic view. In addition to that, we're going through the process of reviewing our footway parking policy, just to make sure we're actually allocating footway space in the right way, to actually make sure that they are more accessible than they should be. But certainly, the other thing to bear in mind is that with the capital programme, there's additional funding going into investing in pavements over the next 3 and a bit years. And that's to reflect the fact that 56% of our footways are in need of major intervention. And it's that high proportion that then leads us to a case of we have to prioritise on the basis of where it's needed most and where the buck is going to have the biggest bang.
Thank you very much. Unless there's any burning issues, I'm going to... Councillor Ali? Okay. The next item on the agenda is update on parking management IT systems, which is going to be presented by Mark Stevens. Well, it is that one, but that one comes afterwards. So can you just hit the ground running if you don't mind?
I hit the ground running as fast as I can.
Thank you.
I gave a presentation to the Scrutiny panel back on 3rd of March of this year in terms of where we were overall. The IT system we've identified is quite complex in terms of how it operates. It's not just one online system. It actually ties in with 16 different systems across the council. So to actually make all those bits work in the right way, it's quite complicated. There's 27 different modules. You've actually got people from across the council working to try and make this all work. But in terms of the overall system, it's taken a fair while to bed in. We know that there's a high proportion of people who are successfully securing their permits online. So, for example, since we started this a year ago, we've got around about 55,000 permit accounts already created online. We've issued over 36,000 resident permits on a virtual basis and 10,000 others. We've issued 375,000 visitor permits, as well as actually issuing a number of paper permits. And in addition to that, I think about £1.2 million pay by phone permits as well through Ringo. So there's an awful lot associated with this. We do know that there have been issues with the system. We've conducted a permit improvement review process to look at what we can actually do to improve the system. We know there are little glitches here and there in amongst the Taranto system, but we are working our way through those. We've been working with customer services, working with the members of the public, trying to gauge all the issues and make sure we're actually taking that forward in a structured way. But however, we have actually seen real clear evidence of improvement in terms of the amount of time that people are spending on the phone, waiting to actually get through to customer service. We actually did a separate analysis of this using an assessment using an external company, looking at a mystery shopping process, which has identified in terms of all the different types of service provided by customer services, parking is actually the best. One of the benefits of the system is that we've actually managed to reduce blue badge theft by 65% in the space of the last year in relation to actually issuing virtual permits for those with disabilities with those blue badges, and we're continuing to work on that particular area. In terms of ease of inquiry, I've got a slide in front of me here which shows a comparison between council tax, housing benefit and parking, and the vast majority of people are either able to get it extremely easily, very easily, or fairly easily in terms of getting their inquiry dealt with. In the beginning of November, we're looking to take forward a revision to the parking IT system through Taranto, through the online permit module, which is going to line up with government design standards, We're going to go through a process of absolute testing on that with users, make sure the whole system works, and we're expecting a major step forward in terms of the overall performance of the system. That's it. That's as far as I can cover it.
Thank you very much. I have a few questions. One of them is in relation to the permits. Up to today, I was having lunch with a resident in Crouch End, and she said the bane of her life was the virtual permits. The virtual permits, in as much as she couldn't access them all the time, for whatever reason, getting on the website, and then you've got the man fixing the washing machine outside and he can't get a permit to come in. She wasn't aware that she could still get paper permits. So I told her she could go to either Wood Green or to Marcus Garvey Library. There is the older residents also who are not so savvy when it comes to, even me, I can't stand them. But I have the paper ones because you can quickly just give it out. It's the speed of intervention. So I'm just wondering, will the paper permits always be there available for people to have? Or is it the essence that you're just going to want to phase them all out?
So the aspiration is to try to ensure that the majority of permits are issued virtually. However, we've always recognised that in amongst the residents of Harrogate, there will be people who don't have access to a computer, aren't particularly computer savvy. Their language might not be English, and therefore the language you're using on the website to actually secure the permits isn't going to be user-friendly. So we've always anticipated that there'll be an extent of paper permits. So that situation we anticipate continuing. What we're working towards with this latest update to the parking system is that we're hoping that it's going to be easier to actually get hold of a virtual permit and for that to operate effectively rather than have to go to Marcus Garvey or to Wood Green Library to actually get them in a paper format. But that's the aspiration overall. And
Councillor Peacock?
Can I ask you a question about the actual physical blue badge thing? My car's been broken into 3 times and I've had them stolen. But the photograph of myself, how beautiful I am and whatever, is always on the reverse. Why can't the photograph be on the front so that anybody who steals it can't use it? Because the photograph will obviously show someone different to the person. I don't understand. What's the point of having a photograph if it's on the back and nobody can see it? I don't understand.
I think that's privacy, Councillor Peacock, is privacy.
Each time it's cost me £150 to get the window done and to get the car hoovered out because, as you know, the window goes into little tiny bits, so you really need an expert person to clean the car.
So we don't actually issue the blue badge itself. That's issued through the Department for Transport. So they're the ones who actually design it and implement that system. All we do is operate at a local level, and obviously by going through the virtual disabled parking permit process, you've got the ability to actually have that and not require you to actually display your blue badge. Yeah, and you with the virtual one, you do not have to display your blue badge. You do not have to do it.
Does that help me in other places? Like if I go to Aldi's and I have a car, will the virtual thing still work there?
No, obviously the virtual only works on street. But obviously if you're going into private developments, whatever, then you obviously need to use your blue badge. But that's not something we can necessarily control. But as I said, the overall blue badge system is operated by the Department for Transport rather than the Harrogate Council. We just implement it at a local level.
Perhaps you could send it to them as a recommendation.
More than happy to do so, Councillor.
Okay, Councillor Ali has a question.
Yes, genuinely a brief question. Right, apologies. So one of the things that I'm seeing as a repeat issue in terms of the virtual permits is the renewal stage. In particular to do with the inability for it to interact with the data check. So a resident who pays council tax would easily be billed because our council tax system, I'm assuming, is a slightly separate system, I'm assuming, but the virtual permit is a different system. So my question is, has there been any sort of thought about how to integrate these systems together? Because it seems to be a regular occurrence where the complaints from anecdotally are reducing in terms of the virtual permit. It's now settling in, but one thing that is a persistent issue is the annual renewal period, where it's based, some residents are constantly being told they don't live in Haringey, even they've been paying council tax for the last 30 years. So I think the concern that I have is the data check in particular, and how they evidence their proof of address in particular. Has there been any queries that you're aware of, officer? Thank you.
So, as I said at the start, there are 16 different systems that the Taranto system ties in with, one of which is the electoral roll. So it should do that through the auto-validation process. We know there are some glitches in that process. What we're looking at is, in terms of the new operating parking module, is that will resolve a lot of those issues. We are aware of it. The vast majority of people are able to get the permits absolutely fine. We do know that there are certain individuals who do struggle with the system, though.
Thank you very much. There's a question from Councillor Emery and Councillor Wallace. I don't know who went first.
Hi, mine's to do with, is the option to still go in and get permits from Wood Green Library an option purely because there's people that I've seen who are mid-80s plus 90s and, believe it or not, have no internet, have no smartphone?
I did say earlier on that it's available. In actual fact, 10,458 paper permit books have been processed since last August. Oh, since November, sorry. So yes, we are issuing those on that basis. So anyone who has difficulty using online processes can actually apply for those paper permits.
Thank you. Councillor Emery.
Thanks for that. I'm going to be quick because I know we're short on time. So usability has obviously come up with my residents too. I'll just list them off. It doesn't work on some browsers like Safari. You can't see previous purchases or activations, so it's difficult to keep track of things. Most areas have 2-hour time slots. Well, sorry, most areas in Highgate have 2 hours time slots, so it would be much more easy if you could buy things in 2 hours as well as 1 hour. And also it would be useful if you could let people buy more than 9 in one go.
So in terms of the usability, as I said, we know there are some issues. Certainly in terms of the 9, that is where there's actually a conflict between the Taranto system and the Civic Icon system, where there is a glitch. We've actually, our colleagues in digital services have been on Civic Icon's back about trying to resolve this. However, what we've done recently is actually said to Taranto, we need to find an alternative solution, which they are close to actually having resolved. So hopefully we get beyond that 9 issue. In relation to the 2-hour bit, I think that's something we have looked at, but certainly in terms of the history and that sort of things, that we know is being addressed with the new OPM, because we've seen some modelling of that already at the Strategic Parking Board, and we're confident that that will actually resolve that particular issue, so people will actually be able to see their back history, which they perhaps can't at the moment.
Thank you very much for that. We will be moving on now to tree planting update by Simon Farrow.
Yeah, Simon's online.
And can he also do the pocket parks as well?
Yeah, just drop him a message. He'll be coming down. Yeah, he's coming.
Simon, can you hear us?
Loud and clear, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are waiting for the tree planting update and also the pocket parks. So can you, we're quite pushed for time. So it'll be really grateful
Brilliant.
if you can kind of just hit the ground running. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Chair. Thanks, councillors, everybody else present. So just in your pack, page 43, agenda item 11. You have a tree planting update for last year in terms of the wards as they were up to May 22. So obviously some of those have changed since then. And last year we planted 571 new trees, and there's a breakdown there should you want to reference it. Part of that was the launch of the new Trees for Streets online platform, where residents were able to sponsor trees, some directly near their house, some celebration trees in parks, and some people were particularly keen to plant trees in areas of low canopy, and they sponsored trees not necessarily where they lived. And that was incredibly successful. If you think normally in a normal year in our old system, we would get somewhere between 6 and 12 sponsored trees. So incredibly productive in terms of being able to engage residents and let them influence where we planted trees in the borough. In terms of looking forward, obviously since then, we've had the Labour Group Manifesto, and that's made some significant commitments to planting at least 10,000 trees by 2030, and also to continue planting trees in wards until we get to a canopy cover of 30%. So we've been looking at that in terms of how we respond to that. And typically on an average year now, we're planting between about 500 to 600 street trees in that year. And we clearly need to supplement that if we are going to get to those kind of targets. And therefore, we'll be looking to not only plant more street trees this winter, but also to look at our first 2 mini forests, which will allow us to get some significant numbers of trees into the borough. The 2 of those forests, so 1,200 trees, will go into Woodside Ward, partly in White Hart Lane Rec and partly in New River Sports Ground, and a further 200 trees in Finchley Park to replace ones that had to be removed last year. And then the other item on here is the urban forest plan, something we've been working closely with Councillor Carter on to look at how we can get to that 30%, and that's in the early stages of development there at the moment. And a key bit is updating our canopy map to cover the new 21 wards so that we know what our baseline is. And the other thing to note, Chair, is that the new tree and woodland plan is coming to Cabinet next week as part of the wider consideration of the draft Parks and Green Spaces strategy that we'll be then going out to public consultation on. So that's it on that item. Would you like me to go straight on to the other one, or do you want to take questions on that?
Can I ask people to hold questions until they finish the other one? Then we can come back, because there are questions which run over the 2. So can we run with that? So just the other one, the pocket parks, is just touch on that one, and then we'll come back for questions. Sheila, I know you're the first. No, just hold on a minute.
Oh.
Thanks, Chair. Okay, so this is a newish initiative included in the budget for the first time this year. And so it's a new programme in development, but is generally targeted at if you like, the spaces at the end of your road, or the forgotten spaces at the end of a particular street, etc. Looking to engage with community interest in bringing forward some local improvements to those areas. We anticipate once all the resources in place, we'll probably be able to do about 10 or 12 of those within the budget we've got available. And we've started a pilot project in West Green Ward around Caversham Road, where there is a triangular planter at the end of the road, and there's some small green verges in there. And so we're working with residents to look at how we develop that. There's some antisocial behaviour that goes on around that area, so we're looking to change the shape of the plant and reduce the ability for people to sit on the wall, and to be able to have more resilient planting in there. and potentially some additional street trees sponsored as part of that as well. So quick whiz through, Chair, and happy to answer anybody's questions.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sheila Peacock first, please.
Thank you very
Then
much, Chair.
Councillor Hymas and Councillor Calwell.
Calverwell.
Beautiful name.
Simon, as you know, I planted 4 trees myself and paid for them in Bruce Castle Park in the Memorial Gardens. But I'm a little bit concerned because what you've given us is the wall structure, but it's out of date. Is it possible we could have an update with the new wall structures so I know how many trees are going to be planted in South Tottenham Ward? Because it's got here 7 Sisters, 1 tree. I'd love to know where that 1 tree is. And the other thing is about pocket parks. When I was mayor, the 3rd time I think it was, we officially opened a pocket park at the end of Portland Road, and that is absolute disaster. You always see drunks sitting around it, and the earth and air is full of cans and all sorts of horrible stuff. So I'm hoping that the new pocket parks that you're going to have are going to benefit from the bad one and really be some really good ones. So I'll be interested. I know the area you're talking about, Caversham Road. Yeah, because that's where the new Tesco's is, isn't it? Opposite West Green School. Yeah, so I know the area extremely well. But I'm just hoping that you're going to learn from the mistakes that were made previously, you know, with the pocket park that was there, which is not good. And please, can I have an update on the new wall structures so I know how many new trees are going to be planted in South Tottenham? Thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Can you answer that, please, Simon?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Happy to answer that. Thanks, Councillor Peacock. And absolutely. So the new planting plan for this year, once we've established where they are going to go, will be based around the new wards. So we'll be able to communicate that to you so you know what's coming into your area. And yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, the challenge with lots of small spaces is they can attract unintended behaviour, and certainly that's something we can work closely with our enforcement team to ensure that we can get on top of. It's not a problem isolated to pocket parks. You could find it in many a park in Haringey, you know, much greater than a pocket park. So we'll certainly be on top of that and ensure that we're not building stuff in and trying to design stuff out from the outset. So thanks.
Thank you very much.
Can I bring in Councillor Hakata to also
just
respond to that?
Yeah, just to add to that, it's a really good point, and that's actually obviously one of the risks of a pocket park schemes, and I can think of other ones. I know that you will know them. There's where they are, you know, fallen into disrepair and misuse, shall we say? And obviously we'll look at other boroughs and how they're doing it. But because it is a crucial sort of spoke in that greening and adding access to green spaces and open spaces for people, especially in the east. But what I would say is that in parks, obviously there has been a change in the way that it's structured, and we now have a volunteering officer. So that officer will be able to work with local communities more proactively to ensure that they're engaged in those spaces. And we will also, I don't think we have him yet, but or her, an engagement officer. So there'll be 2 officers that are working with the community, and that will help, because otherwise what happens is they just fall into disrepair because there's no one there to give it love. But if we're kind of working with them to keep that going, I think that's going to make a big difference. All right.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Hakata, because I have seen the Fagash pocket park at the top of West Green Road. So at least it serves a purpose, though. There's no fires, and you know, and the ones at Bounds Green has time. So if you need some more time for your chicken, you can always go out there on a Sunday and do that. So, you know, they all serve their own purposes. So Councillor Hymas, was it that next?
Yeah, it's about pocket parks, so maybe directed towards Sam. So as I understand, under the existing scheme, you have to be a constituted group in order to get access to what I think is £1,000 in order for your pocket park. Now that involves having a bank account and a constitution, and I also can see that the groups have to match funding in place of at least 50% of the project costs. Now you said there's going to be between 10 and 12. I'm a bit worried that better organised groups, aka people with more time and resources to put into pocket parks, may see more benefits. But actually, I think that, you know, if you look at the public realm, particularly in the east of the borough, that's where the most investment is needed. So how is the scheme going to make sure that that the pocket parks are equally distributed and particularly respond to levels of deprivation and access to green spaces? And secondly, what support is going to be offered so that those groups and residents who maybe have less time actually are given the resources and the capacity by the council to make applications and to make sure that their pocket parks can be successful?
That was a brilliant question.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Hymas. Yeah, you're absolutely right. So I think you're probably reading or referring to some of our existing funding streams. I think when Councillor Carter had the genesis of this idea, it was very much to get below that level of scheme and to be able to not require a group to be constituted. Certainly the Caversham residents aren't constituted. They're just people that have come together as neighbours and are working together to improve their local space. And I think that's where we're targeting this new funding act, is very much at, you know, the 2 or 3 interested individuals that think actually we're prepared to put a bit of effort into improving our local area. And as Councillor Carter mentioned, we have purposefully restructured the team to have additional resources in place to give the very support that you described, so that actually we empower people to do that. And we've got those twin issues, haven't we, in the east of the borough, where actually there may be a bit of desire, but actually incredibly busy trying to make life stack up, and but still want to make a bit of a difference, and we need to build on that capacity. So we are putting new resources in place, and it's also incumbent on about where we put those resources in the first place. So we know we need to do more in the east of the borough. We'll get more outcomes as a result of that, more benefit to residents, and it's certainly a theme that you'll see more of going forward.
Thank you, Councillor Hymas. I would like to add to that in the east of the borough, it's the most marginalised communities, and it's I'm a Windrush child, and lots of the Windrush era, the indigenous people that came from the Caribbean, they have green fingers, so to speak. So they took up a lot of the allotments, etc. But now they are, it's very therapeutic as well, extremely therapeutic to be able to plant and to be able to watch something and allow it to grow. And thank you, Councillor Hymas, for triggering me to remember lots of things in my childhood, which was around growing, cultivating and making things, seeing it, the end product. And unfortunately, the generation which, you know, is the next generation down from me, they don't have that facility. They don't have that therapeutic intervention. They do not have somebody to be able to navigate that for them. And when you are so busy trying to rob Peter to pay Paul, you don't have the luxury of that. So I would like to see something, especially within the youth forum, to bring that back in so that there is that nurturing concept. And I don't know what that's going to look like, but I'll be happy to be on board to facilitate that. Yeah.
That's really well said, and I'll just come back on one very brief point, which is that we're going to be putting out for consultation the draft Parks and Green Spaces strategy, and one of the core elements of it is about inclusion and about going, okay, it's not just about increasing access to green spaces for people in the east of the borough, which is critically important, but also increasing that engagement in the production, in the care, in the maintenance, in the actual involvement in the green spaces, open spaces, and like you say, cultivating those spaces as well.
Thank you very much. And the Councillor Coverwell, the lovely name.
Hi, Simon. This is Eldridge Calverwell. The council planted about 20 trees in Finsbury Park, and then about 2 weeks later, they were all withdrawn. Can you tell me why?
Yeah, Councillor Caldwell, can I just clarify if that's the trees that the Friends planted? Are those the ones you're referring to?
Well, I'm not too sure who planted them, although I'm a member of the Friends of Finsbury Park.
Yeah, so there were some earlier this year. There were some trees that were planted in Finsbury Park. They were in an area which would have created, in effect, almost a mini woodland around the edge of the sunken children's playground. It wasn't something that was pre-agreed and wasn't in line with the nature conservation plan for the park. And subsequently, we've met with the Friends and agreed an alternative plan, which includes planting some standard trees within the Richard Hope Play space. As you know, we've spent a significant sum improving that over the last couple of years, but also to create a new mini forest on the other side of the park. We've now got regular meetings with the Friends to ensure that we're on the same page, if you like, in terms of nature conservation work they're doing in the park. So that situation's improved, and you'll see a significant amount of new tree planting in the park this winter.
Thank you.
Councillor Ali.
Thank you. I've got two questions to the tree planting. So the first question is, so the first question has got to do with the street planting agreement in Bruce Grove, the old Bruce Grove ward. So there were 90 trees promised for the old Bruce Grove ward that were much needed pre-boundary changes. Bruce Grove at the time had no park in the old ward. Pandemic comes along, staffing issues, delays, etc. We were told that they will be held back because of the LTN, something which really quite sort of upset a number of residents at the time. And there's a press release at the time which actually announced this and gave the details and all the rest of it, and I can send that to you later. It now seems that the funding that was announced prior to the election was pulled for another year, and that only 30 were actually planted in the old Bruce Grove ward. Now, my current ward inherits a third or a fifth of the old Bruce Grove ward, so it's something that they're quite concerned about. Now, the council did at the time try to find 100 sponsored trees, but that was through the sponsorship scheme, people sponsoring trees, which some residents did very kindly, mainly on Elsdon Road in particular. I'm aware of my ward. Now, I'm not keen to sort of dwell on the point because I know that there's a number of trees being promised and invested on, but I think it's quite upsetting when we announce something as a local authority, as a commitment, and that we give a figure to it, that we then withdraw it without any explanation to the public, and then we don't follow through on that action. So that's something that we need to really learn lessons from. I'm happy to write to the office, to the canon about this, because it's something that I've been written to by a number of residents. But the point being here is that I think in terms of the canopy and ambition that the Labour manifesto had, one thing I'm quite keen to see, especially in my ward in the east, is that we have green spaces already. We have Bruce Castle Park, Tottenham Cemetery, pocket parks, but we are desperately in short supply of canopy cover for streets. And I would really like to see some sort of update or some urgency behind that, especially trees that are planted in the right parts of the road with the right specimen of tree, so there's no issues later with drought and lack of watering and lack of resident support watering, all the rest of it. So is there any way in which residents can feed into that to actually identify, we think this particular road or we think this particular part of the ward could do some street canopy? Because why I'm worried about is that we will miss out on this because we have a lot of canopy in one part of the ward, which is parks and cemeteries, but they're not looking at the fact that we have very little trees on the pavements and on the roads and on the main thoroughfares. So I'll be very keen to get your thoughts on both of those questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. So I'll take the first one first. So those trees haven't gone anywhere. We did have some significant issues last year in terms of capacity, so those trees are still there to be planted. I have to say at the moment, I can't tell you exactly how many are going to go in which of the new wards, given where the boundaries are. We must have selected locations for them. So let me take that offline, and I'll come back to you with a full answer on that.
Thank you. That's really reassuring to hear. Thank you.
That's no problem at all. And in terms of the canopy cover, as I kind of scooted through the urban tree plan, one of the things that we have to do first is reassess the canopy as per the new wards, because we had 19 wards before, we've got 21 wards now. The trees haven't moved, but the boundaries of the wards have, and therefore we need to reassess where we are in each of those. That will be done using some technology, and being able to use that technology will allow us then to do a kind of first run of planting opportunities in the ward. So that will look at, where is there space, allowing for, the minimum footpath width, where are the traffic lights, etc., all the things my bosses in the room would want me to think about in terms of where we might plant trees. And that will give us a first cut of that. What we will then be able to do is do some stuff on Street View and look at those opportunities. And then once that's done, there'll be an opportunity for us to engage with residents in their wards about where we will or can and can't plant trees. And as we know, the biggest hurdle to our tree planting is actually what we can't see, which is in the road and utilities and the pipes and everything else that's in there. So there's a number of stages to go through there, but we'll be looking as part of the urban forest plan to involve as many residents who are keen to do so in looking for those opportunities in their ward. So that's something we're very much up for, and I think it's an important part of, residents are much more interested in trees, having been through the pandemic and what it's meant, and the recent temperature and all the benefits that they can bring in the climate emergency. So we are, long and short of it, committed to involving residents in the decision making about where we plant new trees to improve the canopy cover.
Thank you, Simon. I'm going to quickly bring in Councillor Hakata, and then I will take the other 3 questions from Councillor Wallace, Councillor Peacock, and my favourite. I shouldn't say that. Councillor Carl. Thank you.
I'm not going to actually. Simon pretty much said what I was going to say, so I think, and probably said it much better, much more articulate. But what I would just say is, in our tree and woodland plan, that's part of our parks and green spaces plan. That's going to consultation. That does address some of those and does put it clearly at the forefront that that resident input into where trees go is going to play a crucial role.
Thank you very much. And then the question, no, it's Councillor Peacock, sorry. I thought Councillor Wallace wanted to say something. Councillor Peacock, thank you very much.
Simon, next to Rowland Hill Nursery, you've planted what I've been told is an orchard. Is that correct? That you've got an orchard there? And if so, have you got plans to have any more trees of that sort, apple trees or pear trees? I don't know what they are. And also that you don't say exactly what type of trees you're planting along the pavements, because in my ward there's been a lot of trouble with the trees with the roots that move the paving stones or create a hazard. So what type of trees are you planting?
Okay, so Chair, if I'll come back on that one. So in terms of are we planting more fruit trees? Yes, definitely. I think colleagues mentioned, the councillors mentioned the role of, if you like, foraging and food, and we talked about herbs earlier. So planting of fruit trees in the right places, for me, is a very good idea. And there's an awful lot coming on that agenda, and we probably haven't got time to labour it now, but happy to share some more on food growing in the borough. In terms of what are we planting, well, we tend to plant different kinds of trees to the trees that you find generally that are planted in our roads now. And the reason for that is because if we take a lot of the classic London plane trees, they have, they're a forest style tree which is being planted often not very far from people's front doors, and can often lead to subsidence issues, raising of the pavement, and generally require quite a lot of maintenance. So we tend to plant trees now that have a much smaller habit, so they don't get as bushy, they don't grow out as far. But equally, when we plant them with a root barrier, which sends their roots further down, so that they then don't interfere with the paving. So obviously, it's going to take probably 100 years for all that to come to fruition in terms of saving the footpaths in Haringey. But over the last 10, 15 years, we've been putting in root barriers to ensure that you don't get the roots affecting the paving in the way we have from some of those legacy tree plantings. So much smaller habits, not as big, not as aggressive in terms of damaging the pavements. I can send you a list if you like.
Thank you very much, Councillor Calverwell.
Simon, a lot of the trees in Stroud Green, the pavement and the tarmac macadam is right to the base of the tree, and you've just spoken now about places where the water can enter. So the water runs, because Stroud Green's on a hill, all the water runs downhill. Why has the council embraced a concept of tarmac macadam or concrete right to the base of the tree?
Chair, it might be best if my Mr. Stevens answers that question. But what I would say before he comes in, if he does want to come in, is that obviously the root system of a tree is usually larger than the canopy of the tree. So in terms of where a tree is getting its water from, very little is around the actual trunk of the tree. So if you can imagine, you know, some lovely, beautiful trees in Stroud Green Ward, huge canopies, and therefore those roots are going far and wide, and we know they do lead to some subsidence issues as a result of that. But generally, the water uptake from the tree is not around the trunk. So in terms of tarmac, that's less of an issue.
Where can I find that in reality? So if I go on the web or anywhere, I should be able to read that. Is that what you're saying?
Can I ask Mark to answer that question? Let Mark answer it. Thank you.
Yeah, so in terms of new trees, when you plant those, the root ball is actually really small. So that's where watering at the base of the tree is really beneficial. That's where you'll often find pipes coming out. So we're able to go in and actually fill the root ball from a bowser. So we can actually make sure that the roots establish, particularly during the summer months. But with the larger trees, as I said, the spread is a lot wider, and it has absolutely no effect whatsoever in terms of being able to put water down the tree. It's a misconception that's where you water a tree. You don't. You actually do it further afield. So we've actually said about the slopes and everything else, what the roots of those trees will be doing is actually looking for water well beyond even probably the canopy of the tree as well. So that's the thing to really bear in mind.
Can I just say?
To follow on that, there's a lot of those roots are causing subsidence in a lot of the houses in Stroud Green.
That's correct. That's because they're looking for water beyond the base, beyond the trunk.
Okay, thank you.
Just to say that, so a lot of those mature trees were obviously planted a long time ago, and so have just been species and position that have planted not thinking of where we are now in the modern world with, but the trees we plant now generally, like street trees, will have root barriers as part of that, and we'll choose species and try find ways to allow the roots to go down rather than out.
Thank you very much, and that will be the last question on that particular topic, and I am swiftly moving on to the work programme update from the Scrutiny Officer.
Okay, if I politely excuse myself.
Be my guest.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hang on, Chair.
Be my guest.
I've got a few questions because there's another section coming up, isn't there?
There is another section coming up. I mean, how long are the
that
questions
involves.
going to take?
There's two questions I've got for Councillor Carter on your specific.
Okay. Okay, I'll allow it this time because we had an adjournment.
I think it was section 9, wasn't it? Q&A session with the cabinet member.
We did.
Yeah,
yes.
it's just there's a few more other parts of his brief that I need to cover very quickly.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Apologies, Mike. I believe you've now taken over flood management from Councillor Chandwani. Sorry? Flood management. Okay. That's what the website says, but we'll come back on that. So can I ask the question? And then maybe we can come back to me on it. Okay, so while it's no longer my ward, obviously the flooding on Park Road in Muswell Hill is an issue that's still a high priority for myself and the Lib Dems. Councillor Chandwani made a priority list of areas in Haringey that needed the most attention. This area in Muswell Hill was placed at number 1 on this list. And major deep work was promised in conjunction with Thames Water. Since then, the only work that's taken place has been the repair of a damaged culvert. The long-term plan has shifted to the Queen's Wood scheme. That area on Priory Road and Park Road needs action now. There was flooding there in the most recent bad rain that came recently, and I think that waiting 2-3 years for this Queen's Wood scheme, I think, will take too long.
Well, again, we've got the floodwater management plan is also going out for consultation shortly, in which our approach to these schemes takes place. I'll have a look at that one and speak with officers and get back to you in terms of our priorities. But certainly the aim and the ambition is to start accelerating the amount of flood water interventions that we have. So I'll have a look at that specific scheme and get back to you if that's okay.
And then one more question. I think you might prefer this one anyway, because I think you might know about this one. Haringey has a large proportion of residents with district energy networks and communal heating systems. There's no cap on their heating bills. So far, the government has not done anything to support these households. So I was just wondering if you'd be willing to write to the Minister to highlight this issue and how it affects Haringey, and also maybe have some meetings with officers to try and find some solutions if the government does refuse to step in.
Absolutely. I'd like to see that. We're obviously creating our own district energy network that we council own, and we'll obviously then have the added benefit of being publicly owned and accountable, and therefore working in the best interests of residents. So we look forward to that. But certainly, and if it's okay with you in terms of those other schemes where there is a problem, I'd be interested in just having that conversation with you offline.
Yeah, I'll take it offline.
Okay.
Thank you very much. And I will swiftly hand over to Philip, who will do the work programme update as a scrutiny officer.
Okay, thanks, Chair. I guess make this as briefly as possible. I guess just encourage members of the panel to email any suggestions they have for future agenda items through yourself, through the Chair. Particularly, we have a meeting coming up in November. So, yeah, maybe if we pick this up via email, it might be easier.
Yeah, at the last meeting, we spoke about inviting the Borough Commander. Have you made progress on that?
Yes, the Borough Commander is coming to the next meeting. The only other thing to say is a plea. So the Scrutiny Cafe is on the 16th of September, and we would very much welcome all the councillors from the 4 scrutiny panels to attend that. It's part of the work programme planning process for this year and next. And yeah, just a strong plea for all the councillors who can come on the 16th to come along to that event. Thank you.
What time is it?
So registration is 9:15. And the event starts at 9:30 and finishes at 12. Obviously, if you can only make part of it, that's fine too.
Okay. Sorry. Apologies. Okay, the future meetings will be on the 14th of November, the 15th of December and the 16th of March. I hope you'll all be available. Thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you very much for your tenacity and staying with it right to the end. I really appreciate it a lot.